I'm Dean Safola, and this is the Azure Academy. Thanks for joining us again at the Azure Academy, and we're talking about automation again today, how we can make our lives easier through code. So if you haven't already, please do click on that subscribe button and join us here at the Azure Academy and be part of the community, as well as give us some comments below on any questions you have or whatever you're interested for our next video going forward. So today we're going to be talking about custom script extensions, what they are, and how they can make our lives easier. So let's go over to the Azure documentation. And here on our docs page, we'll go to products, and then we'll go to our VMs in Windows or Linux, doesn't matter. And then in the how-to guide section here, when we scroll down a little bit, we see use VM extensions. So a VM extension basically is a piece of code that we can attach from Azure to the VM so that we can inject something into that VM. Now, what exactly you inject is completely up to you because it is a custom script. So you have to write the script and then have that script somewhere where it is accessible by Azure in order to inject it as code running alongside your VM deployment. Now, I want to scroll down a little bit here to this extension schema section, and this is what the code looks like at the ARM template level, which we'll get into more in a second. But basically, whether you're doing this for Windows or Linux, it requires the same basic things. There's going to be a name for this particular item, as well as a extension type, and the Windows version is a little bit different than the Linux. And then we need a location, API version, any dependencies, and then the properties. And in this case, since this is Linux, we have a type of custom script and we have a handler version. So let's flip over to the Windows one here for a second. And we'll go back to the extension schema. And you can see it looks mostly the same, but a few differences to call out. The type here is a little bit longer name, and the type in the properties is a custom script extension. So let's take a look at PowerShell at the script that we're going to run. And in our PowerShell ISE, I have a little bit of code, and this is going to install a web server role inside a VM. And then in there, we're going to open the default file, which is the iisstart.htm. We're going to add some content, and that content is going to say, welcome to my web server. We're going to insert the name of the web server, whatever that may be, and we'll add onto the end of that Azure Rocks. So this is a little PowerShell, and we're going to add this to our VM as an extension. We're going to do this in a couple ways, right? And let's hit the add button and create ourselves a new VM. So we'll pick a Windows server for our first go, and we'll choose a Windows Server 2019 for this and just hit create. And we need a name, so we'll call it Win Extension 0, and let's set our region, and we'll go with the East US. So I'm just going to choose an availability zone, and we'll just go with zone 1. Now we need a size for our VM. I kind of like the B2MS size, and then we'll give it a username and password, and we'll scroll down here. And in this case, we want to have an allowed port, and that's going to be for HTTP and HTTPS, and we'll hit next. And next we have our disk configuration, which we can leave alone. We'll have our network config next, where we'll build ourselves a new virtual network, and we will need a public IP address. So we'll hit next. And I'll disable boot diagnostics because they're not really necessary for this build. And on this advanced screen is where we can set up our extension. There are many extensions to choose from, so let's click on this select an extension to install, and that'll open up a sidebar. This is the list of extensions that we can install, and at the bottom you can hit load more, and there's several more down here. But the one that we're interested in today is the custom script extension. So let's select that. So we'll hit create. And now it wants to know where our file is located. So I'm going to hit our blue file button here, and I will choose that same PowerShell script we were looking at, IIS install. And now it wants to know if there are any arguments. So the arguments depend completely on the PowerShell script that you're running, or batch script, or whatever else it is. And in this case, I don't really have any, so I'm just going to leave that blank, and we'll hit OK. So it's really that simple. So let's do our review and create. And our validation has passed, so let's hit the create button. All right, our VM has finished deploying, and let's go to the resource group, and we'll click on our VM, which is Win Extension 0. And we'll grab our public IP and open that in a new tab. And there we go, the custom script extension installed successfully, deploying IIS and customizing the default web page to say, welcome to my web server with the computer name Azure Rocks. So this is cool, but let's look at another way to install extensions. And we'll do this on an existing VM. So here is another VM that was in that same resource group called existing VM. And if we look at the extensions blade here, there are no extensions on this system. And let's take this public IP and open that up. And as you can see, there is no listener on that IP, so there's no web server here. So let's fix that. So we'll go back to the VM, to extensions, and hit add. And we're presented with the same custom script extension and as well as the other extensions in the list. And let's choose custom script again and hit create, and we'll select our file again. There's our IIS file, and we'll hit open. And we don't need any arguments in this case again, so we'll hit OK. And in our notification window here, our deployment tells us that it was submitted successfully, so we'll click that. And this will take a couple minutes to install. We have completed the install of the extension as well as the IIS role. So let's go back to the tab and let's refresh. And there we go. Now that is working as a web server and it's got the correct name here. And that was again pulling from the computer name variable. So it is working on each system. So we've looked at deploying on new VMs through the portal and existing VMs in the portal. There's one final way that we're going to look at doing extensions, and that is through code. So in Visual Studio, I've got a project open for a nested deployment, and this will be linked in the description below, and this goes out to my GitHub. And in here we have a web server, but in the variable section here you can tell we've got several different items, and those all do relate to this extension. So the first one here is the file URI, and that is where the actual PowerShell file is located, and that is in Azure storage in this example. Then we have our arguments, which in this case is nothing, so I've just put a blank space there. And then in the next 3 items, we're going to grab those different pieces so that we can use them as part of the extension. So down in the resources section, we have our virtual machine, and then we have embedded in that virtual machine a resource. So most resources that we're deploying in the infrastructure world can have a nested resource in them, and extensions are one example of that. So we've given the extension a name, a location, and then we have the properties. And this is where we choose that this is a publisher of Microsoft.compute. The type is custom script extension. And then it has a handler version of 1.7, and then these settings. And that's where we reference the particular file that we're deploying as part of this extension. And then the protected settings, which is the command to execute, or could be a password. Your arguments could also be in here, as I have done. And then when we deploy this, it will again deploy our system with the script extension installed as part of the web tier. So let's do this deployment, and we'll right click on our project, and this time we'll deploy to the ARM extension demo resource group. Okay, and we'll click our edit properties here, and we're just going to deploy a single instance of this server, and we'll just deploy a web server. You can certainly deploy all 3 tiers if you want to. Then you can choose what size systems. I'm using small systems, and these are all spelled out inside the templates. And then this will be a Windows deployment because we're using a Windows PowerShell script for IIS. And so I'll hit save and we'll hit deploy. And now we're in the ARM extension demo resource group, and we have our one VM, and this one is sitting behind a load balancer, so you can have many more VMs with that custom script extension installed. So let's open the load balancer. And then we have our public IP address here, so we'll grab that, and let's open that in a new tab. And as you can see, our deployment has been successful through ARM Azure Rocks. So I hope you've enjoyed looking at what custom script extensions can do for you. And this is of course just the tip of the iceberg. And really the options here are just limited by your imagination. So get scripting and start to deploy some stuff and test out this very cool feature. And if you haven't done so already, please do click on our subscribe button and join us at the Azure Academy community. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up icon, and maybe you want to get a notification when our videos come come out, which happens roughly once a week, and you can hit that notification bell for that, or give us some comments below on any questions you have on custom script extensions or anything else as you're on your Azure journey. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next video. Happy learning.